A family who abandoned me away ended up watching me take everything they once tried to steal. The moment the lawyer pointed at me during my grandfather's will reading, my parents' faces collapsed, because they knew their years of lies were finally detonating in front of everyone. They had no idea I'd carried the very thing that would destroy their plan. Before I tell you the full story, do me one favor, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, so this story reaches more people who need to hear it. When I was 14, my parents looked me straight in the eye and told me I was nothing but a mistake. My mother's voice was cold as ice when she said, "We can't keep wasting our lives on you." My father didn't even pretend to disagree. He calmly dragged a black trash bag from the closet, stuffed my clothes inside with mechanical indifference, and shoved it into my arms like I was unwanted trash being taken to the curb. The last thing I heard before the door slammed behind me were my father's words. "You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, you're not our problem anymore." I stood on the sidewalk with everything I owned drooping inside that trash bag. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. I no longer existed to them. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering, but not one person stepped forward. Not one person said, "Come inside, you're just a kid." I was 14, hungry, terrified, and completely alone. The first week crawled by like a nightmare. I walked for miles each day, too proud to beg, too scared to ask for help. Hunger gnawed at me until I crouched behind a diner late one night, waiting for the cook to throw trash bags into the alley. When they landed with a thud, I dug through them and found half a sandwich. That was my dinner. And I promised myself I would never forget what it felt like to be seen as less than human. But hunger wasn't the worst part. Cold wasn't the worst part. Even fear wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence, from the people who were supposed to love me. My mother, Clarice, cared more about appearances than affection. She loved pristine furniture, designer perfumes, and friends who praised her elegance. To her, a child wasn't a person, it was an accessory, and I was a defective one. My father, Damon, was sharper, colder. Every word he spoke felt like a verdict. If I brought home anything less than perfect grades, he simply said, "A Callaway should never be average." Not once, not one time in my entire childhood, did he ever say he was proud of me. When they threw me out, they didn't just close their door. They closed the idea that I had ever been their child. My sister, Mira, was 12 when it happened. I still see her face in the upstairs window, eyes red, palms pressed against the glass, as I walked away. She tried to wave, tried to say something, but my parents yanked her back into the house. Her silent cry burned itself into me. She was the only one who ever looked at me like I mattered. There was only one person who didn't let the family's poison cloud his judgment, my grandfather, Silas Callaway. Damon's father. A man with a face worn by years of building a small business empire with his own hands. He wasn't gentle, but he was honest. And beneath his stern exterior was a heart that understood struggle. He didn't express affection with hugs or kind words. But every few months, when I was barely holding on, I'd look up and catch him watching me from a short distance. One time he slipped me a folded $20 bill and muttered, "Don't waste it." That was his way of saying, "I see you. I care." I survived however I could, washing dishes, shoveling snow, mowing lawns, stocking gas station shelves. Every dollar I earned felt like a victory, a piece of proof that I didn't need Clarice or Damon to exist. Some nights I slept on park benches. Some nights in shelters. And still, I went to school. Teachers noticed the exhaustion in my eyes, the threadbare clothes, but I lied. I said everything was fine. Pride kept me from admitting the truth. By 16, I had mastered the art of disappearing. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for more. I simply endured. One memory kept me alive through all of it. A moment with my grandfather when he said, "The measure of a man isn't who stands with him when it's easy, it's who he becomes when no one stands at all." I didn't fully understand it then. But later, those words became a compass, pointing me toward the belief that even if my parents had erased me, I had the chance to build something stronger out of sheer necessity. The years passed. I pieced together a life from scraps. At 18, I rented a tiny room above a hardware store. At 20, I worked 2 jobs while attending night classes. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't a burden. I was surviving, and survival was my victory. But I still wondered, did Mira remember me? Did she ever ask about me? Or had Clarice and Damon successfully scrubbed me from the family story? Then came the phone call, cold, unexpected. A cousin vaguely remembered me enough to say, "Your grandfather, Silas, passed away. The funeral is at the estate." The same estate I hadn't stepped foot in since they threw me away. I didn't own much, a borrowed suit, shoes that pinched, a sputtering car that sounded like it was coughing up its last breath. But I went. Because this time, I wasn't returning as the boy they abandoned. I was returning as the man they failed to kill inside me. The morning of the funeral, I stared into a cracked mirror above the hardware store. The reflection showed a man who carried scars no one could see, but also a determination that no one, not even my parents, could break. I pulled up to the Callaway estate, a mansion lined with luxury cars. My rusted sedan looked like a mistake on the gravel driveway, but I walked through the entrance anyway, ignoring the glances. The smell of polished wood. The sting of old memories. And at the center of the room, my grandfather's casket. I walked to it, placed my hand on the wood, and whispered, "Thank you, for never forgetting me." And then everything changed. Because that was when I saw them. Clarice. Damon. Rhett, my uncle. I saw the smirk on Rhett's face. The pursed lips on Clarice. The calculating stare in Damon's eyes. And when the whispers spread that Grandpa Silas had left behind a $42 million estate. They didn't cry. They didn't mourn. They demanded their share. And that was the moment I realized? This funeral wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of a reckoning none of them saw coming. The ceremony ended, and everyone instinctively gravitated toward the reading of the will. It was almost comical. People who hadn't said a kind word about my grandfather in years suddenly sat up straight, their eyes sharpening with greed. The lawyer, Mr. Hayes, stood at the front of the room holding a thick folder that seemed to radiate tension. I stayed in the back, forcing my breathing to steady, pretending I didn't notice the stares aimed at me like arrows. Clarice whispered to Damon with the kind of tight, brittle smile she wore when she was pretending to be a grieving widow instead of a vulture. Rhett rubbed his palms together, already imagining the millions he thought were moments from landing in his lap. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat, and the room dropped into silence. As executor of the estate of Silas Callaway, he began, his voice firm, "I will now read the provisions of his will." He started with minor gifts, modest sums to distant cousins, donations to charities Silas supported, sentimental items bequeathed to old friends and employees who had stood by him. But everyone knew this was just the opening act. The air grew thicker, the tension coiling as each line drew closer to the part everyone was waiting for. Finally, Mr. Hayes paused. He lifted a final sheet of paper, adjusted his glasses, and looked up. "As for the majority of my estate," he read, "which includes properties, businesses, liquid assets, and the sum of $42 million. The room leaned forward. "I leave all of it to one person. And only one." Clarice's chin lifted. Damon straightened. Rhett's smirk deepened. Mira looked terrified. "And the heir," Hayes continued, "is not the one who demanded most loudly, nor the one who carries my name the loudest." A ripple of confusion swept across the room. "The heir is the one who kept my secret safe." Silence hit like a hammer. Even the heir felt stunned. Clarice's lips parted. Damon stiffened. Rhett frowned. Then Mr. Hayes closed the folder, exhaled slowly, and lifted his hand. His eyes locked onto me. And he pointed. Directly at my chest. Gasps erupted like fireworks. Conversation exploded into shouting. Damon lurched to his feet. "This is a mistake," he barked, face flushing red. Clarice clutched her pearls, shaking her head violently. "Silas would never choose him." Rhett slammed his fist on the side of his chair. "This is nonsense." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking away from them. Hayes raised a hand for silence. "Silas Callaway was very clear," he said. "The heir is Aaron." Clarice snapped. "Why? On what grounds? He abandoned us years ago." I almost laughed. The revisionist history was absurd. But Hayes didn't falter. He adjusted his glasses and asked calmly. "Aaron, do you still have the box your grandfather gave you?" That question dropped into the room like a grenade. Clarice stiffened. Damon's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth would crack. Rhett's smirk slid right off his face. But the question hit me hardest. Because those words pulled me backward, 12 years back, to the freezing alley where everything changed. I was 15. Huddled beneath a broken fire escape. Shivering so violently my bones ached. I'd gone days without real food. My hands were raw, my breath visible. I truly believed I might die there. Then footsteps approached. I tensed, afraid, desperate. "Boy!" The voice was unmistakable. I looked up and saw him, Grandpa Silas, taller than I remembered, wrapped in a heavy coat, with eyes that saw right through the filth, the hunger, the fear. "You're tougher than they'll ever admit," he said. He knelt, his movements stiff with age, and placed a wooden box into my lap. It was small, worn at the edges, the brass lock gleaming faintly under the alley light. His voice deepened. "Inside this box is something worth more than money. Do not open it until the time is right." I stared at him, confused and shaking. "Why me?" His answer was simple. Raw. True. "Because you are the only one I trust." I didn't understand the weight of that then. But I carried that box everywhere, from shelters to basements, from borrowed rooms to lonely doorsteps. Sometimes I stared at it, wondering what power it held. Sometimes I almost pawned it to buy food. Almost. But I had made a promise. And the one thing poverty never stole from me was the ability to keep a promise. The memory dissolved as I rose from my seat in the funeral hall. My hands reached beneath the chair where I'd tucked my satchel. I pulled out the same wooden box. The same brass lock. The same weight. Gasps swept across the room like a cold wind. Clarice grabbed Damon's arm. Rhett's eyes widened. Mira covered her mouth. Damon lunged forward. That proves nothing. He could have stolen it. No, Hayes said firmly. Silas documented everything. He entrusted this box to Aaron. The contents will confirm it. Clarice hissed, this is madness. We raised him. You threw me away, I said quietly, but every word sliced through the room. Don't rewrite history now. Clarice froze. Damon's face contorted with rage. Hayes stepped closer. Aaron, do you wish to open it now? The box trembled in my hands, heavier than it had ever felt. Fear pulsed through me. What if it was empty? What if the secret was nothing? But then I remembered Silas's face that night. His voice. His trust. Yes, I said. It's time. I set the box on the table. The entire room leaned forward, breaths held. Hayes reached into his coat and withdrew a small brass key. Your grandfather instructed me to give this to you only today, he said. He fitted the key into the lock. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The lock clicked. Slowly, the lid creaked open. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn, aged, familiar, and a folded envelope sealed with dark red wax. Whispers rose like a tide. Damon sneered, that's it? Papers? But Hayes shook his head. These aren't just papers. This is Silas's truth. He opened the journal. And began to read. Mr. Hayes's voice carried through the hall as he read the words written in Silas Calloway's unmistakable handwriting. Every stroke of ink felt like a blade cutting through the years of silence, lies, and cruelty that had rotted this family from the inside. To my family, Hayes began, I leave these words. Over the years, I built a fortune from nothing. I built a legacy meant to endure. But money is not the true measure of worth. Character is. And character is revealed not by greed, but by loyalty and sacrifice. The tension thickened. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, unsure if they wanted to hear what came next. Hayes continued reading. To my eldest son, Damon, I leave nothing. Clarice gasped loudly, as if someone had slapped her. Damon's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. His eyes flicked through the room, wild with indignation. You betrayed my trust when you stole from the company to cover your debts. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Stole? From Silas's company? Clarice grabbed Damon's arm. Tell me that isn't true, she hissed through clenched teeth. But Damon said nothing. Silence confirmed everything. Hayes turned the page. To my brother, Rhett, I leave nothing. You sought only to outshine me, never once honoring the Calloway name. Rhett's face reddened. That old man hated competition, he muttered, though his voice cracked with shame beneath the forced bravado. And to Clarice, Hayes read, who married into this family, I leave nothing. For your heart has always been ruled by vanity, not love. Clarice reeled back, fist gripping her pearls so tightly they nearly snapped. He is lying, she sputtered. Silas adored me. This isn't real. But no one looked at her. Everyone was staring at me. Hayes continued. To my granddaughter, Mira, I leave the hope that she may one day free herself from the chains her parents have built around her. Mira covered her trembling lips. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, her eyes flickering toward me with pain and something that looked like apology. Then Hayes reached the final passage. But to my grandson, Aaron, I leave everything. Because when the world abandoned him, he did not abandon me. He kept my secret safe. The room erupted. Damon stormed toward the table. This is a farce. He manipulated my father. Hayes didn't flinch. Silas had this notarized 3 years ago. Every signature is verified. Every document is legal. There is no contest. Rhett pushed his chair back so hard it nearly toppled over. Oh, I'll contest it, he snarled. No way in hell he gets everything while the rest of us get scraps. Hayes raised the journal. You may try. But your fraud, your theft, and your history of misconduct are all detailed in these pages. In your own father's words. Rhett froze. Clarice turned on me, her expression venomous. You ruined this family. Do you hear me? She screamed. You ruined us. I stepped closer, not aggressive, not loud, just steady. No, I said. You ruined this family the night you decided I was disposable. The night you chose image over love. Grandpa didn't choose me because of money. He chose me because I was the only one who didn't betray him. Clarice recoiled as if my words had struck her physically. Then finally, like a quiet bolt of lightning, Mira spoke. He's right. The room stopped. Every head turned. Mira rose from her seat, her hands trembling, but her voice clear. He's right, she repeated. All these years you told me Aaron abandoned us. You told me he didn't care. But he was a kid. You threw him out. Her voice cracked. You lied. And you made me afraid to even say his name. Clarice hissed, sit down, Mira. You don't understand. No. Mira snapped. I do. I understand more than you think. Aaron is the only one in this room who has never lied, never stolen, never manipulated. Grandpa saw it. And now I see it too. Something inside me broke and healed in the same moment. Mira stepped toward me, her eyes glassy. I'm sorry, she whispered. I always wanted to reach out. I was a child, and she swallowed a sob. They made me think you hated us. I shook my head. You were a kid, Mira. None of this was your fault. Hayes cleared his throat. It is final, he said. The estate, the businesses, the accounts, everything now legally belongs to Aaron Calloway. That is the will of Silas Calloway. Silence. Crushing, heavy silence. My parents stood frozen, their empire shattering around them. Rhett's face twisted with rage he couldn't express. And in the center of all of it, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not victory. Resolution. Clarice clung to Damon's arm. We'll undo this, she hissed. We'll fight him. But Damon's face, usually a mask of arrogance, had gone slack, hollowed out. He must have realized what this meant. Years of lies had finally run out of room. They stormed out of the hall, their desperate footsteps the sound of a dynasty collapsing. Rhett lingered long enough to jab a finger at me. You think this makes you one of us? You'll regret this. You'll regret ever opening that box. Then he turned and left. And just like that, the people who once threw me away walked out of their kingdom with nothing. The boy they abandoned stood in the ruins of their pride with everything. Mira moved to my side. Her voice was small but steady. You're not alone anymore, Aaron. For the first time in years. I believed her. Hayes placed the journal into my hands. Your grandfather wasn't blind, he said. He saw who deserved to inherit his legacy. He saw you. I opened the journal and read the final line, Silas's handwriting firm, unwavering. My heir is the one who understood that trust is worth more than gold. The words hit me with every emotion I'd buried since I was 14. This was more than an inheritance. This was absolution. Mira placed her hand on my arm as we stepped out of the estate. The winter sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the driveway where my parents' luxury cars had once gleamed like trophies. Now there was nothing. Just silence. The kind that doesn't hurt anymore. The kind that feels like the beginning of something new. In the days after the will reading, the world around me shifted in ways I hadn't imagined possible. One moment, I was a man scraping by above a hardware store. The next, I was the legal heir to the Calloway empire, properties, businesses, accounts, assets, all under my name. It was overwhelming, surreal, and strangely quiet inside my mind. Because even though my grandfather had given me $42 million, what he really handed me was something far heavier. The truth. Lawyers met with me daily, transferring ownerships, signing documents, explaining holdings I never knew existed. Entire boardrooms of executives stared at me with thinly veiled shock as Mr. Hayes introduced me as the new owner. The man they had never heard of. The man they thought was long gone. My name, was now the one everyone whispered. Meanwhile, Clarice and Damon tried to fight back. Of course they did. For days, they bombarded Hayes with calls, filing petty objections, sending furious letters, insisting that Silas had been manipulated, confused, or mentally declining. But Hayes countered everything with the journal, hundreds of pages of Silas's own handwriting, recounting years of betrayal, financial misconduct, lies, and emotional cruelty. Every accusation they hurled at me broke against the wall of their own recorded actions. Rhett blustered too, at first. Threatening lawsuits, threatening violence, threatening to expose me, which was ironic, considering I had nothing to hide. But when the evidence in the journal exposed his years of siphoning money and sabotaging Silas's projects to benefit his own ego, Rhett went silent. Then he disappeared. The Calloway empire that had once shut me out was now closing its doors on the people who thought they could own it forever. Through all the chaos, Mira stayed close. At first cautiously, then comfortably, then like she had never left my side at all. She came to the estate with me as I walked through rooms I hadn't seen since childhood, rooms where I had once played, laughed, existed before being cast out. The halls felt foreign and familiar at the same time, ghosts of memories brushing against me like cool wind. Mira stopped in front of a tall window overlooking the grounds. "I used to sit here," she said quietly, "and wonder where you were. What you were doing. If you were okay." I swallowed the ache forming in my chest. "You weren't allowed to ask." She nodded, eyes shimmering. "I asked anyway. They just never answered." We stood there for a moment, letting silence settle into something gentle instead of heavy. "You know," she said softly, "I think Grandpa knew this would happen. All of it. I think he knew you would survive. Maybe he did. Maybe he'd seen something in me I never saw in myself. Maybe he understood that loyalty from someone with nothing was more powerful than greed from people with everything." One evening, Mira and I sat at a table in the mansion study, sorting through Silas's journal. She read passages aloud, notes about business deals, memories of his youth, reflections on his children and grandchildren. Some entries made us laugh. Others made her cry. But one stood out above the rest. "Aaron reminds me of myself. Not because he is perfect, but because he endures." Endures. I traced the word with my thumb, feeling its truth settle deeper into my bones. Over the next weeks, life found a new rhythm. Meetings. Decisions. Responsibilities I had never imagined carrying. But beneath all of it was something steadier, something my parents had never understood. I didn't want wealth to replace the childhood I lost. I just wanted to build something that was mine. Something with meaning. One of the first things I did was renovate my small room above the hardware store. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember where I came from. I didn't want wealth to erase the years of struggle that shaped me. And I visited Silas's grave often. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with Mira. We brought flowers. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat in silence. Either way, it felt like coming home. The news eventually spread beyond the estate. Headlines whispered about the lost grandson, the unexpected heir, the Calloway comeback. Reporters tried to contact me, but Hayes kept them at bay. My parents tried reaching out too, through lawyers, through relatives, even through emotional pleas crafted to sound sincere. But sincerity had never been their language. I didn't hate them. I didn't want revenge. Not anymore. The moment I inherited Silas's empire, I realized something. They had already lost the only thing they ever valued, control. Now they had nothing left to manipulate. The power had shifted, permanently, and they knew it. One afternoon, I returned to the estate's front steps. The winter sun glowed across the driveway, where weeks earlier my parents and uncle had arrived in luxury cars, their wealth dripping off them like perfume. Now those cars were gone. They had driven away empty-handed, leaving behind an empire that had never truly belonged to them. Mira stepped outside beside me, arms wrapped around herself against the breeze. "Do you forgive them?" she asked quietly. The question settled on me gently, not like an accusation, but like a truth she had been waiting to understand. I took a long breath. "I don't know if forgiveness is something they ever cared about," I said. "But I know this, anger isn't holding me anymore. They tried to bury me. But I grew anyway." Mira nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "You deserved better," she whispered. For the first time in many years, I believed that. In the months that followed, I rebuilt parts of the Calloway businesses, focusing on people Silas had admired for their integrity instead of their status. I created scholarship funds for kids who had been thrown away by their families, kids like me. I invested in shelters that had once kept me alive during long nights. Because the greatest revenge on cruelty is building kindness from its ashes. Because the strongest answer to abandonment is creating belonging. And because Silas was right, the measure of a man is who he becomes when no one stands with him. I wasn't the boy they threw away anymore. I was the man who stood anyway. The fortune didn't make me whole. The truth did. And the promise I kept became the foundation of everything I built next. This is the story of how I went from being treated as nothing to learning I had been trusted with everything. And if this story found its way to you, maybe it's because you needed a reminder. You are not defined by the people who fail to see your worth. You are defined by the strength you hold when the world turns its back. That strength is yours. And it is priceless. If my story touched you, if it made you feel something, do me one favor, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps me share more stories of resilience, survival, and the truths life teaches in the hardest ways.